Joan Didion was one of the most important American writers of the 20th century. During her career, which spanned over 50 years, she published essays, novels, screenplays, and memoirs. Her writing has had a lasting influence on several generations of writers, and she's considered an icon of literary style, with her coolness and a keen eye admired by journalists, creative writers, and readers alike. She sees making sense of the world around us weaved into a narration, into a story, as a deeply human predilection. She famously says in The White Album, "We tell ourselves stories in order to live." It is perhaps her insistence on the importance of narrating that is so captivating. Didion published 5 novels, among them Run River in 1963, A Book of Common Prayer in 1977, and The Last Thing He Wanted in 1996, interweaving them with collections of essays, such as Slouching Towards Bethlehem from 68, The White Album from 79, and more recently South and West, 2017. She also wrote reportage as well as autobiographic writing. Where I Was From was published in 2003, and The Year of Magical Thinking from 2005, which is a text dealing with the sudden death of her husband, very successfully adapted to a Broadway play starring Vanessa Redgrave, and Blue Nights from 2011. What is particularly interesting to me is that she puts the stamp of a Westerner and a Californian on all of her writing. "I am at home in the West," says Joan Didion in one of her last publications, South and West from a Notebook. She clarifies, "I am easy here in a way that I am not easy in other places." Her identification with the West and California is observable in all of her prose, which covers a variety of genres, but it is precisely because it is problematic that it proves captivating. Didion is able to say a good deal about California does not, on its own preferred terms, add up. And we believe her, because she calls herself a native daughter and proposes the many meanings of California throughout her career. Joan Didion was born in Sacramento in 1934, and her ties with California remained unbroken until in 1956 she won a prize in a competition organized by Vogue, which was a job in the magazine's New York offices. In 1968, she writes about the move rather nonchalantly. "When I first saw New York, I was 20, and it was summertime, and I got off a DC-7 at the old Idlewild temporary terminal in a new dress which had seemed very smart in Sacramento, but seemed less smart already, even in the old Idlewild temporary terminal, and some instinct informed me that it would never be quite the same again. In fact, it never was." The move to New York that year affected her deeply. Soon after, she wrote her first novel, motivated by a nostalgic longing for the place of her origins. Didion recognizes the need for consolation as the main impulse behind the composition of her first novel, Run River. "The plot of the novel was imagined, but the impulse that initially led me to imagine this story was real. I was a year or 2 out of Berkeley, working for Vogue in New York and experiencing a yearning for California so raw that night after night, on copy paper filched from my office and the Olivetti Latera 22 I had bought in high school, I sat on one of my apartment's 2 chairs and set the Olivetti on the other and wrote myself a Californian river." The trigger for the novelistic process is homesickness, but what is also suggested is the idea that claiming the land by writing an element of landscape for herself is validated by personal nostalgia. Loss, in this case, is the basis for and an explanation of the creative impulse, and the novel is a way of coping with the loss. As Didion states somewhat ambiguously, it created a protective distance between me and the place I came from. When Didion writes about her losses and protects herself against their emotional impact, she loses the land again, this time in a self-protective gesture. After 8 years in New York, Didion returned to California with her husband, John Gregory Dunn, and their daughter. And even though she traveled extensively and ventured out to write about various places, such as Miami or El Salvador, California has remained the center of gravity for both her life and her writing. Their home in Malibu became the epicenter of writerly and artistic activity. The writing couple befriended actors, musicians, directors, socialites. In a word, they melted easily into their Californian life, becoming a fixture of the California writing scene. Didion wrote the majority of her work in California, and it has always been the point of reference for all of her writing: journalism, reportage, reviews, screenplays, short stories, and novels. And even though Didion is primarily seen as a non-fiction writer, I would say that it is fiction that allows the writer to represent her vision of California, of Californian identity, of American melancholy in an unobstructed way, which is to say, not concerned primarily with a representation of a narrative progress of facts, figures, and events, but focused on a representation of the guiding idea or myth behind California's story. Didion's making home for her family in California and leaving it from time to time to see it from a distance allowed her to construct a complex, prism-like vision of the state where she was born, grew up, and later chose to live. Much of Didion's writing carries melancholic longing for the land, even when it locates pain elsewhere. It is melancholia that underlines Didion's vision of California and its character, and the reason for it is the sense of loss in its various configurations that informs California's history and identity in Didion's prose. It is a point that I discuss in detail in my study of Didion's novels.